Hello, I'm going to be doing a second tutorial on Project Shooting Star. In the last one, I made this program and had two rectangles. They have different variables controlling them, and they have different incrementers, 3, 8 versus 5 or 8. Yeah, so they go off in different directions, and the complicated thing that I threw in on this one is the get function, which returns an image object so I'm storing an image in S that I can put in here, and that was just my backdrop that I set up before I even got into the draw loop of like all of these stars that I blitted to the screen at random locations. And the reason that I did that, storing it in an image, is because if you put something like this in the loop, then each time through the loop it would pick a different location, so these would be going all over the place instead of just sitting in a static location. So another way, there's lots of ways to do everything, but another way to do the static thing is to store, like, you could make up a variable name for each one of these stars. See, I have like 20 stars. I could make star 1, star 2, star 3, star 4, and give each of them an X and a Y position, and variable W equals 20 for their width. Over here I'm making each star have a W, and I'm gonna actually randomly assign them. I'm putting the star objects into an array, and these square brackets are the delineators for setting up an array. An array is a variable that you can store virtually anything in. So I'm setting up star objects, and the objects are going to be in between curly braces and then separated by commas. So this will be one star object, and this will be another star object. See, once I did that, a second one popped up because I've already gone into my draw loop and set up an inner for loop that will say for every eye in the stars, I'm going to set up a random grayscale stroke, and I'm going to look at the .w property of that particular star. See, if I make this one 10 and this one 0, then this is going to be a single pixel, and this is going to be a point with a radius or diameter. I can't remember. I think the diameter would be 20 here. Because the stroke weight is 10 pixels. Anyways, you're going to get another static image doing this method. So I'm going to change this to I only want my stars to be about like that. So again, each of these sets of curly braces is a single object in the array representing a single star, and each star has its own X, Y, and W properties. And then I just take one of these and put a whole bunch of them up there. And I have a nice static twinkly backdrop. They're twinkling because each iteration of the draw loop, I'm setting up a different stroke value. If I had gone in here and said within each of these there's another property, SW equals colon random something or other, and then gone in here and said stars I dot SW for the stroke, then they'd have a static stroke weight. So you usually put the things that you want changing in the draw loop, because the draw loop is cycling over and over and over again, and you put the things that you want to be static up in here. These aren't immutable. Immutable means unchangeable. I can change the X properties, or the Y properties, or the W properties just by going in here and saying, well, for example, if we wanted to simulate a rotating body, by the way, I put this between 0 and 300 so that I could put like a ground right here for like a planet. And if the planet is like spinning, I can't move my mouse into the screen, but I'm imagining like the rotation is like, so each of these stars would go and move across the screen and then show up at the bottom. So to do something like that, it's not that hard. You would just have to change their stars I.y. So this is the Y property for each star in the array. And I'm going to say plus plus and just see what happens. So they're all moving down now. Now I'm going to have a conditional that says if stars I.y greater than or equal to 300, so now it's kind of given the effect of something rotating. Not exactly right now, but we need to put like some buildings and a ground. Okay, so I'm going to make a dark green color for the ground. Start at 0, 300. That's this point right here. Go all the way across and down. Well, I'm going to have a height of 100, but to dynamically assign that in terms of width and height, I would say height minus 100. Or in fact, that is 300, so that is what I needed right here. so height minus 100. Height is 400. 100 is how high I want the ground. So that is 300, and then 400 minus 300 is 100. So I want to start at 300, and I want its height to be 100. And since I'm changing the stroke color there, I'm going to say no stroke here so that this rect isn't twinkling as well. So the next thing I'm going to do is to set up some rectangle building shapes, and I'm going to give them all an X and Y property so that my program knows where to start drawing them, and I'm going to give them a width and a height property. And I don't want them all to, well, let's just do that. I was going to say I was going to calculate from the randomly assigned height value down to the ground, so it looks like they're all coming out of this line. That I'm sure we could do, but I just barely decided. I'm just going to give them a random height value so that like the buildings don't all pop out of the horizon. Some of them pop out from down here. And I'm going to store them in an array. So that's the square brackets. And I'm going to make them all have a set of properties within the curly braces. And I need them to have X properties, which are randomly assigned from 0 to about 380. So I want them to, I don't want them to like cover up my entire backdrop. I want them to be down here somewhere. So I'm going to say random between about 200 and 250. And the width, so since I'm stopping at 380, I was thinking I was going to maybe set up a static width of about 20. Yeah, for now. I might change that later. Now, I don't want any of my buildings to decide, for example, that they're going to be at x equals 100, y equals 200, that'd be somewhere right here, and then randomly decide that the height is 0 or 10 or even 50, because then I'd have like a building floating out in the middle of nowhere. So I changed my mind again. I actually need this height variable to depend on y. So there's probably a couple of different ways I can do that. And This is getting way more complicated than the entry-level introductory animations. But I think that the best way to do this, given the methods that I'm using already, is going to be within a for loop. So from outside of the buildings array, I should be able to this is going to be the 0th element because it's the very first one. I should be able to access those elements that way. So I'm trying to set up the building's height value, and I am going to make it depend on its randomly assigned y value. And if I get this all set up correctly, then I'm going to create a for loop and have code similar to what I'm trying to create here inside the for loop that will, and I'll use like a template like this to push new buildings into the buildings array and then set up their new h value. So let's think about this. Y is a random value between 200 and 250. H needs to go from the randomly assigned y value down to the ground. And the ground is at height minus 100. Let's get that up here. It's going to depend on that. Should probably pause this video and think this over. So building.y height Now I'm putting the building at the bottom so that it'll cover up any stars. Give it a black fill color and draw a rect. Oh, I need to make sure that the building doesn't twinkle. And we're going to need a for loop in here. But first of all, let's just test out the first building. By manually extracting its values. And it should have a W and an H property. XYWH. Manually extracting its properties into a rect function. Oh. Holy smokes, it worked. Alright, now I'll try and explain. ABS means absolute value. I have no idea if that was necessary. Let's think about that too. Buildings.y is smaller than height minus 100. So I can get rid of this, I think, by reversing the order, because if I don't, then it's going to have a negative height, which Rect apparently knows how to handle. But if I just reverse the order and put the larger value, 300 minus 200 and whatever, then I'll get a positive height. Alright, so let's go ahead and set up this for loop I was talking about. Now, I think I'm going to want, I'll just go with 10 buildings. So I'm going to need to add things to the buildings array. I'm going to do that with the .push method. So anything I put in between these, anything I put in here is going to get added to the buildings array 10 times. And I'm going to use this template to just add a new building. And now that so that entire chunk of code right there is the push syntax, and it's just going to add a random one just like I did manually. But it's going to do it 10 times because I'm putting it in a for loop. And each time through the for loop, I'm going to do something like this, but instead of manually putting in the the index of 0, I'm going to make it depend on I, because that's the iterator of my for loop. Hold on. We've already done 0. So I'll start out my for loop at 1, so that way it doesn't redo the 0 element. So now I'm just going to copy this line of code right here because I need another for loop down here. And I can make this start at 0 and just do all of the or I can leave it where I have the manually extracted 0 element and the one to 9 elements all being extracted right here. Doesn't matter. So again, just like how the stars were statically set up, they're not static anymore because their properties are mutable, and I decided arbitrarily I wanted to change them. The buildings are statically set up, and I'm not going to mutate their properties, but at this point in the code right here, you have an array that is very similar in structure to this array. Each element has a few more properties, well, one more property only, in its objects. I just did it slightly differently. Instead of copying and pasting that same template over and over in here, instead of copying and pasting that, I decided I needed to put it in a for loop. I'm sure there is other ways of doing this, but I just wanted to set up the object first with X, Y, and W, and then afterwards make the new H object outside of everything that I'd done before, and push the new H object into that object, I mean H property into that object. And I don't think push is the right word there, but assign each property a new H object based on its Y object, I think is a better way to say that. And this video is getting kind of long, but I suppose I will put some shooting stars into my program over here. Now in the last program that I made, I was using star images as my static stars, but I think that I'm going to be using the star image. I think I'm going to be using star images for the shooting stars instead. So where before I was drawing a rectangle, I'm going to image a star where the rectangle was before. This is a no-no. Don't name your array the same thing as something that you're naming in some other variable. It's kind of a good tactic to have some naming convention, so like .image or whatever for image objects. And I'm just changing where that star is going to start out at. I'm going to start out right here. Wait, where is it? Oops, I changed the other one. So now the two different stars that are depending on these two sets of variables are starting out like right there and shooting down in that direction. I'm going to make them a little bit bigger. And I'm gonna have them when a shooting star comes down, it sort of runs out of itself. It burns up in the atmosphere somewhere up in here, and then it disappears. And there's usually more than two of them if you're looking at like a meteor shower. So I'm going to have my two stars just cycle, and I want them to have random directions. And I think the easiest way to accomplish all of this is, yet again, objects. So I'm going to set up yet another, well, I don't think I'll do arrays this time. I think I'm going to make just, I'm actually going to make, yeah, two star objects. Okay, so var star1 equals, remember the curly braces, and where before I was putting sets of curly braces in arrays, I'm just going to have two objects out here by their lonesome. Now, get rid of those variables up there because I'm about to replace them. Give each object, maybe it'd be easier to copy a template up here. So x is varying between 0 and 400. Y I'm going to set to 0. W I'm going to set to 20. What else? Oh, velocity. So right now I'm just like, this is what's called magic numbers. Magic numbers are bad. You get down deep into a 1,000-line program and you find some kind of number that doesn't have a name, like xpos. It's just 8. Well, right here it's kind of obvious that it's just like increasing ypos, but sometimes you're just like, what the heck is 8 supposed to be doing? What is it? So, but anyways, I'm gonna make the have a velocity, and the velocity is going to be an array, and I don't know what it was down there, 5, 8. So you would say something like, instead of ypos plus equal 8, you'd say ypos plus equal velocity 0 or 1. But it's not going to be ypos anymore, it's going to be star 1. You'll see if we get there. I'm sort of losing my voice. So I guess that's a pretty good template. We'll just copy and paste that in here. And xpos is not defined because I got rid of it. We're going to need 2 image functions still because we're still drawing 2 stars to the screen. The update logic is going to be like str1. I think that's how I spelled it. Star1 dot y plus equal star1 dot velocity. Well, at this point it's kind of arbitrary whether I want it. I'll say that it's x velocity, y velocity. So this is the 0 element, this is the 1 element. So velocity 1 and in here So I got one of the pieces of the update logic. One of the stars just falls straight down because I'm only updating its y velocity. Star1 dot x plus equal star1 dot velocity 0. So now it's going down 8 and over 5 pixels every frame because that's the velocity I set up for it. Now let's copy that. And do star2. And give them different velocities. So they shoot off in different directions. And now I think I said something to the effect of stars burn up. Well, the star is going to start out larger and then slowly get smaller if it's burning up, right? It's losing mass. Well, actually, the opposite of that. It loses mass, but from what you see on the Earth, it would get brighter because it's getting hotter. So I'm going to start them out with small width, and I'm going to put a new update down here. Increase the width. See in here, the width and height of the image is that W property of the objects. Did not like that. It didn't get appreciably big until like 3/4 of the way down the screen. So I'm going to start them out just slightly larger. And increase them by 2 each time. Now to keep them from going to the buildings, I'm going to make them pop out of existence right here. And instead of creating hundreds of star objects and just deleting the ones that get down this far, I'm going to reuse these 2 star objects, and each time one of them gets down here, it's going to be given a new set of properties that'll make it seem as if a different star is replacing it. So the way you check if something happens is with if conditionals. If the thing that is in between these 2 parentheses is true, do the thing that's in between these 2 curly braces. If star1.y, if star1.y is greater than 200, star1.y equals 0. That'll make it cycle like that, because X is not being reset, so you get that kind of effect. So what we need to do is, within this same conditional, we need star1.x equals random should be using width and height, but whatever. I want to have a positive y velocity, and so the first element was the velocity 0 was the x velocity. So I'm doing this backwards. I'm going to make the x velocity somewhere between -5 and 5. So the velocity is going to be a vector that points somewhere in a specific arc that I'm thinking about. I'm going to have it be a negative value between -5 and 5, and a positive value between 3 and 10, I was thinking. Looks like we need to reset the W value to, what was it? The initial value was 12. So if I was really going to get into this even further, I would make the rate at which the radius increases depend on the velocity, because if you can see, a very slow velocity will result in an enormous radius down here, and a very high velocity results in a negligible radius. And in reality, higher velocities would make it burn up quicker, so it should have a larger radius quicker. And I just don't like the fact that it's like freaking bigger than the building by the time it gets down there if it has a slow velocity. That kind of sucks. But the final step would be to make this the same set of conditional for star 2, but that's just copy and paste, change 1 to 2. And I would also go in here and give them a random y value so that they're on like a different period. Because if you just did that last step of copying that conditional, then they would both, well, actually they have different velocities, so that's not true. I was thinking they would both cycle to the top at the same time. Anyways, that's it for this video. Thanks for watching. I hope that helped somebody somewhere sometime.